Alright, so on here you have all the families that are listed at the top. This is the actual extra practice one at the very top. And I'm going to go through it sequentially and basically take a look at all these different information on here, but keep in mind the families that are at the very top as well. So the first clue on here says O is a larger radius than D and S, which tells you that in comparison of O, D, and S, we're not sure where they'll go, but O is definitely going to be after them. A is an alkaline earth metal. Well, that'll be the second family, along with I and L, and it has the smallest radius in its family. So if the smallest radius in its family is going to be at the top, so A is going to the top, we know I and L are going to also be in that family. We're not sure where. So I'm going to cross that clue out like I did with the first one. Y is slightly more electronegative than O. It doesn't give us too much information, so we'll leave that one alone. H is a halogen and is less electronegative than M and T. So if H is a halogen, that tells you that T, H, and M must be the second to last group because that's where the halogens would be. And it also tells you it is less electronegative than M and T, so H would be the very bottom member of that family. So I'm going to cross that clue out. We don't really know where M and T go just yet, but we know that they'll be in this column. E has one more proton than T, so when we figure out T, we can figure out where E goes, which basically tells us that this family right here should be E, P, F, and Z, because if E has one more proton than T, and we know T is the halogens, E must be one of the noble gases. So that tells us that the very first family, the alkali metals and essentially hydrogen, should be the W, N, V, and G family. But let's keep going. R is an element that needs 3 electrons to become stable. So 3 electrons to become stable, well, if we do the oxidation states, we've got a +1, +2, +3, plus or minus 4, -3, -2, -1, and 0. So if it needs 3, it's a -3. So R needs 3 electrons to become stable. That tells you that the family YBR must be in that column. We just don't know exactly where just yet. I'm going to cross out that clue because I have actually used that. A is slightly smaller atomic radius than W. Well, that tells us A is slightly smaller. Okay, W should be right next to A. So that gets rid of one of those on there. So as A is slightly smaller radius than W, so W should be slightly bigger, so just to the left of it. G is shiny, malleable, and conductive, and reacts with acids. That tells you G is a metal. Now, that doesn't give us really too much information because we already knew G is actually going to be in this location. So as far as I'm concerned, it's kind of a useless clue. Q has 6 valence electrons will tell us that Q should be that -2 column along with its family members K and J. So keeping that in mind, we know where Q is, we know where the rest of those go. Let's keep going from there. X would probably form a +3 ion. So X is going to be in that +3 family along with C and U. Now we have those families laid out. D would be a plus or -4, so D is going to be in this column along with O and S. We learned from an earlier clue that O has the largest atomic radius of the 3, so O should be at the very bottom. And then we just have to spot D and S. And now we have all of our families laid out in the various columns, so our families are good to go. So now let's go through the rest of the clues. Y is slightly larger atomic radius than Q. So wherever we end up putting Q, Y is going to be right next to it. That doesn't help us just yet. H, the outermost electron, is the 4th energy level. Well, again, it's kind of like a repeat one because we already know that H is in the 1, 2, 3, 4th energy level. So if its outermost electron is the 4th energy level, that didn't really help us. It was really a useless clue. B has the most non-metallic properties in its family, which means it's going to be highest up in its column. So the most non-metallic properties in this family would put B at the very top. So we'll get rid of that clue. E is a non-reactive gas. Okay, it's kind of a redundant clue because we've already figured out that E is going to be in this column. C has atoms that are larger than the atoms of U. So now we'll go and take a look at C. We don't know where X goes just yet, but we do know that C should come after U. But it really does depend where X is going to be. So that kind of takes care of that spot. Q is less reactive than J and K. Well, let's take a look. Where is Q? So Q is in this section right here. This is the non-metal section because these are the ones that are gaining electrons. So if Q is less reactive than J and K, Q should be at the bottom and J and K will be somewhere at the top. D is the most reactive non-metal in its family. So we'll take a look at D, non-metal, most reactive, would put it at the very top, which by default makes S go in the middle. So now that column's taken care of. G is more reactive than W, less reactive than V. Okay, so let's take a look. We have G, V, W. W is already placed, and it says G is more reactive than W, but it's less reactive than V. That doesn't help us too much, except for the fact that we know if it's more reactive than W, it's got to go lower down, so somewhere in that spot. Now, if it's less reactive than V, that actually helps us a lot because we have two locations. That would mean that if it's more reactive than W, it goes below it in either of these locations, but it has to be less reactive than V. So now we just figured out exactly where G and V go, and then by default, N would be at the very top. J is the most electronegative in its family, so let's see, where is J on here? We'll go ahead and find, here's J. So if it's the most electronegative, it would be at the very top right here, which then by default puts K into this location. Z has two more protons in each atom and an oxidation, or has two protons in each atom and an oxidation of 0. So if it only has two protons, it should be the second element for Z. Atoms are slightly larger atomic radius than D. So X is slightly larger than D, which will put it right to the left of it. We'll come back to C and U in a second. Now we do know that from an earlier clue, U is going to be smaller than C, so therefore C is at the very bottom. U ends up being right below X, and we've taken care of that entire family. P has its electrons distributed over 3 energy levels, meaning it's in the third period. So if we go ahead and find out what family P is in, it's in the noble gas family. It should be in this spot, the third spot. V is less electronegative than W, G, and N. Well, we already knew that based off of an earlier clue, so that's a redundant clue that we didn't need. N has 1 valence electron and is the smallest in its family. So again, that verifies we put N in the right spot. L is more reactive than A, but less reactive than I. So L is more reactive than A, must be lower, but less reactive than I must be higher than I. So he takes care of that and put those in the correct location. And M is a halogen with valence electrons in the third energy level. So M is a halogen means right here, third energy level means 1, 2, in this location would put M, which by default we would then have T at the very top. Now if you look closely, we're still missing some, so we have to go back to our clues and take a double check and see, well, what clues were we missing? Okay, Y is slightly more electronegative than O. So if Y is slightly more electronegative than O, you'd expect it to be very close to O. So Y should probably be in that location and B should be in this spot. That gets rid of that clue. We scroll down, so E has 1 more proton than T. Well, if E has 1 more proton than T, then E should be in this location, 1 spot to the right. And then by default, F should be our last spot. Well, let's see if there's any other outstanding clues that we have skipped over. H is slightly larger than Q, or excuse me, Y is slightly larger than Q. So let's check, there's Y, slightly larger than Q, so that does verify that one on there. And every other clue is accounted for, and all of our locations are actually taken care of. So that should be your answer key, is solved for that one.